Good morning, everyone. I kind of feel that I've been given a short end of the stick because I'm being punished for not having come yesterday to make my presentation. So I want to appeal to all of you to forgive me for not having been here yesterday. I was actually misscheduled. But somehow God works things out because the ISOCO presentation answers the questions that I am going to raise. And so it's easy for you to work backwards from what he has already shown you to the questions that I would be proposing. So my presentation is really just to raise questions. It isn't about, I'm not presenting a solution to anything. We're just going to discuss issues. And we started with this, we chose this headline because we think this is what frames the conversation for us in Africa. And there are things that we really must confront. So I work for a company called Infographics. We've been working for about 20 years in various aspects of technology, but primarily around creating interfaces between businesses, governments, and digital interfaces between businesses and governments and consumer. Our experience in public sector and private sector has shown us that we can dream about things, but we also have to have a capacity and a persistence to actually realize them. It's amazing to think about all the bandwidth that lies on the coast of Africa today and how all this happened in the past 10 years only, and yet in the 10 years, we have only been able to utilize about 10% of all that capacity. Addressing those problems are going to be the critical issues for whether or not this Internet of Things or this Internet of Everything actually is going to make sense to us as a country or as a continent. So let's go forward and just understand what we call understanding the new normal. So this, I'm not sure if you can see it very well. Let's just start from here. If you look at a little line that's running off the coast of South Africa, the little black line that's running off the coast of South Africa, I think most of you would have seen this maps. But that little black line at the edge running off towards Asia represented all the internet capacity that Africa had as of 2010. And over the past 10 years, everything else that you can see running around the coast of West Africa has happened. Fundamentally, what has happened is that we've gone from one little cable called SAT3 to a mass, almost 19 terabytes of capacity, completely unheard of 10 years ago. And this is the pace at which change happens. And for Africa, it's critical for us to understand that we are not going back to where we were before. The world has moved, and we have also moved. But oftentimes when we have conversations around technology, they tell you, oh, I can't get my email, and you're talking about IT. Oh, there's no power, there's no this, there's no that. Those conversations are real, we experience them, but they cannot represent our today. There have to be things that we understand as challenges and we face them squarely. Otherwise, all these pipes will mean absolutely nothing. So when we think about this, we have to also add the fact that 10 years ago, the cost of a computer, a computing device, and the capacity of that computing device was beyond reach. Today, you can arguably say that for $100, you can be a part of a digital world. This was not the case 10 years ago, where the entry point was about $1,000. It is possible for us to envisage that within the next 10 years, a computing device, something that enables you to participate in the digital world, will cost as low as $10 and ultimately will be free. It will be free because the device will disappear and the interfaces will be anything that's around you. A glass wall, as connectivity spreads across the world, and particularly across Africa, you will find that you may not necessarily, we've seen pictures of people with keyboards on their skin, where the skin itself is actually being used as a keyboard or as a computing device. This is not inconceivable. It's actually happened already. So if we know that a device cost is going to drop, and we know that the connectivity is going to drop and will eventually proliferate, what is left for us to do? What you would see is something which this bubble map shows. On the left-hand side, we have the situation where we are, with the big, the blue circle is showing what is called the cloud economy. All the other bubbles around them are people who are connected to it in some way or the other. And you can see, as at 2010, on the left-hand side, the only circle that was squarely in the cloud economy were the little population that were actually working in a formal economy. The fellows you see out in the purple on to the right-hand side is the rural economy where most of Africa lives, totally disconnected from the cloud. And yet we speak about the Internet of Things and the Internet of Everything. Our proposition is that this bandwidth will eventually move. It will move from the coast and it will move into Africa. And when it moves inside Africa, this is what would happen. You're going to have a massive expansion in the number of people in the cloud economy. And what that means is that we would have crossed a major milestone as a continent. The question is, when we get them connected, what are they going to do with all that bandwidth? So there are 12 points, almost impossible for you to read on that screen. But there are 12 things that define the new normal, and I'll just race through them very quickly. The first is convergence. We've said that everything digital that can be digital will be. And Mr. Elon Musk is in the business of trying to move human beings from one place to another, literally decomposing them on one side and transporting them on the other side. God knows how he's going to do it, but I'm not going to get into one of those machines. I may come out the other side, and my name, Chinenye, will actually make me female. And it will take my code, Chinenye, and turn into a female on the other side, and that would not be acceptable for many. Ubiquity says that everywhere and everything will be connected. It's inevitable. But in that world, there's also another dimension, which is the omniscience of the cloud. What it means is what we are now experiencing and feeling threatened by, the fact that anywhere you are on this planet, everything you do that connects to the internet literally leaves a footprint. And so you can be known, and everything about you will be knowable. We talk about privacy of data, particularly in Nigeria, in the public sector. We hear people saying, oh, we can't go to the cloud because we want to secure our data. We're hearing arguments about data sovereignty. And the fellow who's speaking to you, you ask him for his email address and his Hotmail. So he drives official correspondence through Hotmail. So where are the Hotmail servers? They're in Abuja somewhere. Or he's carrying a BlackBerry and he's saying, well, it's a nice phone. What do you do with it? Everything. Where is the data that sits on it? He thinks it sits on his phone, but it's actually outside the country. What it means is that we have to get to the point where all the walls dissolve and all the boundaries go away. We must come to the conclusion that we have actually crossed into a new world. And we can deny it as much as we want, but we're actually living in it. There's going to be a massive increment in terms of the kind of speed and the responses that you expect from the world in which you live. And the world is going to be very, very fragile. Fragile in the sense that nothing that you see today will be the same thing tomorrow. We're accelerating to the point where our lives change every single day. And not just the lives that we know, but the lives that we try to keep secret. So anyone here who has one email account should raise his hand. One. Anyone? Only one email account. So, anybody? No one. Why do you have two? I can tell you, you don't have to answer. Because we have different lives and different personalities, and we use those email accounts as identity. So when we want to do certain things, we use different emails. When we work, we use a different email. When we're at play, we use a different email. When we're at school, we do something else. It tells you that we're living in an infinitely elastic world, one that is changing constantly, and we are the main drivers of that change. By implication, when we talk about e-commerce, which was supposed to be my main subject, we have to understand that we're taking all those needs that we have as a human being and moving them into an environment where there is no one you. Each time you buy something, you present a certain identity of yourself, and that identity is identity that satisfies a specific want or need that you have. So if you're buying furniture, that's one thing. If you're renting a movie, that's another thing. If you're going to one of those sites that cause trouble, that's another thing. I don't want to mention the name of those sites, but we all know where the teenagers go, don't we? So each time we shop, we go to the internet to consume. And each time, each site that you go to, there's a transaction that takes place. That identity that you've adopted to go online requires to be fed by something. It's consuming content, it's buying products, it's engaging in an interaction with other people, or it's simply creating a new identity for itself because you just want to be somebody else today. Not I am Kate, but or some such thing, but you're a different person. Now, what that means is that shopping in the way it is defined traditionally in e-commerce is actually undergoing change in itself. I'll race through these slides because there's nothing here that you can't find for yourself on the internet. And, but I did want to point out here that what we were doing yesterday, and these figures actually show that whereas 10 years ago, 96% of purchases were happening offline. Today, that number is changing. It's changing, it's transiting into this space where there's partially online and then there's full online. But by tomorrow, and that tomorrow is as imminent for us as it is for the rest of the world, it's going to be nearly 100% because everything that can be digital will be. Now, what kind of things are people buying on the internet? I'm going to run through this. Just skip this forward a few slides. So, I want to show you what it is that people are doing online. Well, I was going to. All right, we'll come back to it further down. Let's go into Africa and talk about Africa a little bit. There's this famous book called Africa Rising. If you haven't read this book, I think you need to grab a hold of it. It's very accessible, and it speaks about the new world in which we live. Africa Rising refers to a concept that we are now in a position where we can actually look at Africa as an effective part of the global audience. It felt like God came into the room and voice just went up. All right, so I think you need to take it down a bit so it doesn't echo. What this book basically says is that we need to have a different way of looking at our continent. And that when you take a different view of the continent, it is not what you think it is. It's not 100% what we think it is. He speaks about certain things, and he says we should recognize that Africa is richer than we think. According to his data, Africa is richer than India, if you can believe that, on the basis of the GNI per capita. And he says that there are a dozen countries in Africa that have higher GNIs, as gross national income per capita, higher than China. Again, it's about a population story, and we'll come back to that demographic. He says that if you think about Africa as a continent and not as countries, 53 individual countries, then your marketing opportunity opens up. When I sit here and I think about water and who's going to drink water, obviously I would think about the people who are right next to me. But companies like the telcos and the banks now market globally across boundaries. And this is the way that we also have to think about a lot of other things. And I'm going to accelerate through this. But if you get the book, you would understand where we're going to. All this is driven by a concept that there's a middle class in Africa that has the capacity to consume. And that middle class will behave in the same way that a middle class anywhere else in the world will. And the concept is that in Africa, there are about 350 million of its 900 million people who sit inside that middle class. This data is what led to a lot of FDI, and with 5% growth over the past decade, it looked like Africa was indeed rising. But somewhere along the line, somebody threw some sand in our garri and changed this hopeful continent into a doubting continent. Because what they said was that if you look at Africa's demographic in that middle class, you can discount nearly 50% of that 350 million. Because most of the purchasing that is happening for fully 50% of that population is driven by money that comes through remittances. So remittances is perhaps the greatest revenue earner across Africa. So I am able to purchase things because my brother sends me $100, not because I have earned it as by way of salary or creating new wealth. So money is being transferred effectively from the diaspora back into Africa and is powering this middle class. Most people would tell you personal stories of how they wanted to buy a car, and their brother sends them some money through Western Union, and then they were able to buy a car. Effectively, if you withdraw that support of diaspora, 150 million of the 300 million fall off. That gives a completely different picture because it means that we're very close to poverty. And this is the reality of Africa, that we are actually in a situation where we are trying to build almost a bubble. There is a new class of people who are emerging, who are digitally connected and purchase and are involved in e-commerce. And that class is telling the story of a rising Africa. But what is happening is that a very small number are actually rising, and the rest are simply watching because they don't have the capacity to actually engage the economics of production. So with that reality check, we can go straight into the key discussions. These are the big boys, the Congas of this world. Africa and Nigeria has produced its first unicorn. A unicorn is a $1 billion company. Any company that is valued at $1 billion becomes like a unicorn. And Africa produced its first one. And happily, it wasn't InterSwitch, as was projected in 2014. But in 2016, the unicorn emerged, and it was Jumia. And Jumia, with that capacity, is driving e-commerce. The big question we have to ask is, who is powering the purchases that we see on Jumia? We don't have the data, but we can hazard a guess that the people driving Jumia in Africa represent between 3 to 5% of the population of the continent. Therefore, what is the benefit of e-commerce for Africa? Because Africa is not us in this room, air-conditioned, urban, wearing suits and ties, expensive wristwatches, shoes. Africa are the kind of people that he was referring to when he made his presentation around Isoko. And if we cannot bring e-commerce and all the technologies related to the internet to benefit those people, then clearly Africa is sinking, not rising. And you can look at the index. This index refers to the 2015 Global Index on e-commerce. Top 30 countries, no African country. Now, what are people buying? If you see well, unfortunately you can't see this, and I can't even see it very clearly here. But all the areas that are here, the shopping is going on in things like furniture, clothes, wristwatches, electronic gadgets, etc., etc. I doubt if the farmer in Ghana or the vulcanizer in Umuahia is actually shopping on these sites. And this is where Africa is. So let me close it very quickly, because I'm over my time. We need to understand where the new digital trails are taking us to. And we need to find a way to make sure that technology works for Africa, because we cannot work for us in isolation. And here's this tale. This map shows the continent of Africa and its distribution by median age. What you see in green represents the countries in Africa where the teenage population is in the majority. So, by 2050, Nigeria will be the third largest country in the world by population at 350 million people. It will be a part of a continent that has 2.48 billion people. Note, we are 1.1 billion today in Africa, and this is 2016. So in 34 years, our population is going to double to 2.48 billion. And by the year 2100, we will be 4.3 billion, almost 4.4 billion people on this continent. The land mass is not increasing, and we're all going to live in it. What do we do? Africa's biggest problem is not going to be e-commerce or connectivity. It's not even going to be poverty. Africa's biggest problem is going to be hunger. These people have to eat. And we are not currently producing enough food to feed the population of 1.1 billion. And our rate of growth in terms of agricultural production is lagging behind our population. And that's only one of the problems. So first of all, our population is exploding, and it is young, very young. Second, that population, because it is young, is migrating from the rural areas to the cities. So there's urbanization that's taking place. Third, we will no longer have mega cities, or not even smart cities. We'll have mega slums. Because you can't have a state of 21 million people, and you have an eco-Atlantic city that houses 200 people, 200 families, individual families. If our resources go to building these beautiful cities, these guys will surround us, and one day the walls won't hold them back. You cannot have 21 million people and 500,000 living in the lap of luxury, and the rest are in poverty. And there is a role for technology in doing this. If you have a teeming, youthful population that is hungry, they're not going to go to school. It takes you to the next problem. They will be sick. So our two biggest challenges as a continent are not poverty, hunger and health. As a consequence, I believe that we shouldn't be talking about e-commerce per se, unless we can twist and turn e-commerce to address two things: e-food and e-health. We have to feed our people, and we must make them healthy enough to be effective members of a continental economy. If we fail, there are consequences. This is a consequence that few people want to speak to. The fact that there is a lifestyle change that has to happen to take what has been traditional, the normal cattle trails across all of Africa, and see how does that sit in a digital environment? How does that sit in digital continents? If we are actually moving as a continent into that space, we can no longer have this type of cattle trail. It means that our e-commerce platforms, our production platforms, our distribution platforms, everything needs to be able to transform this kind of production, distribution, and commerce, and convert it to an e-platform. Otherwise, if we continue to build the traditional e-commerce models that are powering the developed world, instead of turning those to face the reality of our continent, we will be like salmon, racing furiously upstream towards our death. But it's not all dire. There's a lot of work that we've done. And some of the work that ISOCO has demonstrated and the Space Agency has demonstrated points us in certain directions. We have to find the will to be a part of the fourth wave and to transform our continent for the majority and not the minority. Thank you.